All right, thank you, everybody. We're going to get started. The first order of business this plenary session is to hear back from the radical collaboration sessions that just finished and to coordinate that conversation. We're going to invite AgMIP9 to come up. Eric, again, is the program coordinator for AgMIP and has made everything that you see here possible. So thanks, Eric, for that. And come on up and take charge. Here we go.
Welcome everyone to our final session for AgMIP9, not counting the side sessions tomorrow, of course, but so as Alex said, we're going to take just a couple of minutes at most for each of the radical collaboration sessions that we just had to give a quick report back. You don't need, we're not expecting any slides or anything, just come up and give your quick report back. So the first radical collaboration session was the use of new remote sensing resources and machine learning across AgMIP. So actually, Alex, I don't know if it's going to be you or Amy. Yeah, go on.
Right back up. All right, so yeah, the radical collaboration session number one was a nice crowd. We had a very lively conversation. Overall, we were talking about remote sensing and data assimilation. There was a lot of conversations around accessing products that are actually out there and making sure that we shared, algorithms to actually access and download and make the best use of data. There was a lot of talk about understanding what remote sensing products were really approved to do, what the remote sensing experts had designed those products to be for, and increasing the conversation around sharing those caveats and best practices of use. There was also an identified need for structural adjustments and modifications and improvements in the crop models so that they could take in remote sensing data. And there was a soft proposal for an AgMIP research software group that would be really around kind of structural code enhancements. There was a interest in particular questions around can we stop and restart models, and that would not only be good for data assimilation but also for machine learning and other advanced data approaches. And we asked around the room and found that some of the crop models have that capability, for example Wofost, but others do not, and that is a hindrance. There are some questions and conversation around the difference between what we could do and what we should do. And figuring out kind of the best practices in combining lots of good products. And we even ended with some words from Brad Dorn, the NASA program manager, who noted that there is still an opportunity to hear feedback from this community about specific data sets or information that might motivate a future NASA mission to provide the types of data that could really revolutionize our field. And I'm sure there's more, but that's the report back for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. So I'm going to invite Jonas to come up, just give a very, a very brief update, report back on the second session, which was modeling food shocks at local, national, and global scales. Ron Sands and Jonas.
Thanks. I got drafted to being co-chair recently for the session. Our session was modeling food shocks at local, national, and global scales. We had a wide representation of expertise in our session. I think the crop modelers are probably most represented, followed by the global economics, regional economics, people dealing with food security, and risk management. So we started out just by talking about some activities that are ongoing, and one of those is this multi-bread baskets food shock project that we have joint between Columbia University, the Economic Research Service, and the International Food Policy Research Institute. That came about from a workshop at the Aspen Global Change Institute 4 years ago, where that was the same topic there for a full week of discussion. We had 90 minutes of discussion. So we started out by putting up Alex Ruane's summary slide from that workshop, which had different boxes and areas where the different modeling groups could fit in to a collaborative process. And so we asked participants to see where would you fit in into that diagram to spur discussion. We identified a lot of challenges. The models really aren't in shape to handle some of these really short-term events like price spikes. And in terms of moving forward, I think the notion of scenarios, perhaps graded from lower impact shock to many multiple shocks, was a suggestion. Coordinated scenarios that the different modeling communities could run focused on extreme events is also a really good suggestion that came out of the group. So I'll let Jonas fill in anything else.
Sure, I will just say that we had very lively discussions, and we actually concluded with a soft proposal that we want to take this into a follow-on activity where we want to bring the little different communities a little more together and bring the AgEcon team, the crop modeling and the climate folks, and also allow additional models going past the equilibrium modeling, which is challenging in terms of food shocks, and have a little bit of a consortium where we get back together and bounce some ideas where we take this forward, because we have a long laundry list of things that we want to get to. So I think it was very stimulating, and looking forward to these discussions.
Thank you, Jonas and Ron. So do we have Bruno, Basso, and/or Terry Nip for supporting global and national policy processes? I think Terry's coming up.
So, like everyone else, we had, I think, a really good discussion. I think ours was a little more challenged in that it's harder to define the issues up front. We were there to talk about global and national food policies, and particularly how to bridge between science/modeling and the challenges of decision makers. And at the very beginning, we kind of did a quick review of at least how it works in the US, and then we talked a bit about how that's different. Say in the case of Scotland, they might have much easier access to their decision makers, and they're not as far away. In the US, they're accessible, but there's a bit of a labyrinth to go through, and we're humongous. And in the global south, there can be all kinds of complications about being able to do it at all. So we talked about the differences in the policymakers. Are you administration? Are you legislative? Are you judicial? And then what are the questions? What are the pain points? What are the challenges that the decision makers are working with? And then how do you make the science and the modeling relevant to their questions, not the other way around? Because it doesn't work very well the other way around. I think where we ended very simply was some suggestions about how we might go forward in the future. And among the suggestions was the idea that not everybody in AgMIP is going to want to work in the interface between modeling and science and policy, but some do. And so maybe we could create some workshops where we bring stakeholders, policymakers, and modelers together and foster that discussion. Maybe we create some training sessions. It was requested. Some of our younger members were asking if they have a place in this discussion, and pointed out that their peers are running Congress. So yes, there's a place for all of us here, and that's where we ended.
Thanks, Terry. Do we have Greg Kiker or Walter Bethken for modeling mixed crop livestock systems? Greg is coming up.
I was taking notes, so. Yes, I think that we had a really nice group, a lot of good energy. I think we came up with, the first thing we came up with was that mixed crop livestock systems depend on the country, region, and sector quite a lot. There's a huge diversity of sections. What US mixed systems are very different from African crop livestock systems, which are even different than like African nomadic pastoralist systems. So again, what we did is we spent some time working with different use cases, kind of getting out those typologies to start with. And I think we have a pretty good functional list. I think what's coming is that we had a great group of AgMIP people who are working on the livestock, but I think there's a lot more people. Mariano Rufino basically had a really nice list of both the elements of the modeling needed, but also that led to the idea of who also needs to be in on the discussions. Animal health, different groups need to be brought in that are not traditionally part of the AgMIP community. So what's radical about this collaboration? There's one that's not radical at all, and the other one that is. So the first thing that's not radical is we hope to follow the AgMIP methodology for bringing collaboration together. So bringing the models, we felt like that we were like the AgMIP of 10 years ago when they're first coming together with models and how to do things, because we have a set of livestock models, but how do you work them together? All the same issues. It sounded very familiar to Ken Moody. So the idea is to do that, but so that's not radical. I think there's a great methodology to work with, and AgMIP's laid that out. What is radical that's coming is it will push the modeling into directions that AgMIP may not have done before, because I think this is going to be, there's things that are stuck into models that can be spatial. They can be the idea of managing manure from animal enterprises and coming back on the land, and potential non-point source pollution and different aspects of that are going to push us in a very good direction. It's going to push us into relevancy in new sectors. So I think it was a very good thing, and we hope to build off that. So thanks.
Thank you, Greg. And last but not least, do we have Sieg, Snap, or Matthew Hayek here for cross-scale interactions between agriculture and biodiversity?
So Matthew was doing this, but I think his kids called him. So I will do it. It was a wonderful group, and I think we had both interests in at the edges of biodiversity, seeing how AgMIP could bridge those gaps, work at different scales, and also a very strong interest in how both land sparing and sharing. So how we could use our models more to understand better how to develop systems that are both most biodiverse within agriculture, and then how that supports biodiversity supporting outside that. But I think one of the things that came out of it is this importance of stakeholders, whether you're designing new systems or you're trying to understand what drives the systems. We had people working at the global levels, and then also at the very fine scales and with stakeholders. So I think what we came out of that was that we need to be doing more transdisciplinary, more participatory modeling, and that we have something to contribute. So there was a lot of interest in coming out of this with a new working group. And I think it'll probably work at the two different scales, both within agrobiodiversity, and then seeing how we need to engage more with the conservationists to see how we can contribute there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sig. While I have the microphone, I'm just very quickly, since I mentioned the side sessions tomorrow, if you haven't already, but you're interested in one, please be sure to reach out to the leader who's listed in the agenda. And and just be sure tomorrow, if you are gonna go to a side session, bring your name tag. It'll make things a lot easier if you already have it. If you don't, we'll write your name, but it's great if you bring them tomorrow. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Eric. I'm giving a pre-introduction to the final plenary of AgMIP9 because I said at lunch, I wish we had 10K for every time at AgMIP9 the modelers were exhorted to get with decision makers, get with the stakeholders, get with the policymakers, right? If we had 10K for each time we had that exhortation, AgMIP would be fully funded for the next 10 years. So, but I just want to give a very special, a personal thank you to Carrie Fowler and Bill Hohenstein for coming in person to AgMIP9, to this final plenary. It's very special, and we appreciate it. After so many years of Zoom, right? It's just so very, very special. And I want to introduce, also it gives me the opportunity to introduce also a very special colleague, Barbara Stinson, who was recently the president of the World Food Prize Foundation, and for many years worked as a principal and developed and founded the Meridian Institute, and has spent literally decades exactly strengthening science stakeholder policy linkages. So over to you, Barbara, to lead this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Greetings, great to see everybody from this vantage point. We're at the final plenary session for AgMIP9, and I'm very excited about not only the keynote speakers, but the panelists that we are offering you today. We are going to, in this session, explore strengthening science, stakeholder, and policy linkages, as we've been doing really throughout the 4 days, by hearing from two policymakers, both from U.S. State Department and from U.S. Department of Agriculture, and then a panel that has both a farmer, one that really represents thousands of farmers from Iowa, a representative of a methane hub, and we've had him online a number of times, a researcher and an agriculture food systems donor and a really important operator in the space. So let me start by introducing Dr. Carrie Fowler. And let me just say, we're going to have each of them make a set of remarks. We'll have a couple of minutes for questions for each of them, and then we'll call up the panel for their short remarks, and then hopefully have quite a bit of time for interactive questions for them and for Carrie and Bill. So Dr. Carrie Fowler is the Special Envoy in Global Food Security at the U.S. State Department. He is known as the father of the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, which many of you may know, of course, contains more than 1 million unique crop varieties. Dr. Fowler is also former executive director of the Global Crop Diversity Trust, and he has been professor of Norwegian at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, as well as a senior member of Biodiversity International. He has an esteemed career across so many wide-ranging accomplishments, but did, for example, oversee the UN's first global assessment of the state of the world's plant genetic resources. He's currently developing vision for Africa crops and soils, and with many others, and in complete partnership with AgMIP. And so he's going to talk a bit about all of these, well, some great historic perspective and some of these current activities. Dr. Fowler.
Thanks, Barbara, and thanks, Cynthia. What's not to like about radical collaboration? Yeah, I think if we're going to bend the arc of change in the world toward in a positive direction, it's going to be because of people like you in the room today, and it's going to be because of the collaboration you have with each other and also with the dreaded policymakers that Bill and I represent. And to get a little housekeeping note out of the way, I agree with everything that the next speaker is going to say. So I always find some way of working a particular number into my speech, and I want to get it out of the way quickly. And the number today is 591. That number changes every month. We've had 591 consecutive months in which the global average temperature for the month exceeded the 20th century average for that month. What that shows is that the climate has changed. It is changing. And another thing has changed, and that is that climate change denial isn't quite what it used to be, not after 591 consecutive months. The effect of climate change on agriculture is quite profound. Climate affects all parts of the plant at all stages in its life cycle, from germination to harvest, from roots to pollen. Unfortunately, there's no gene for crop adaptation. The entire plant really has to be adapted. And so that begs the question, well, adapted to what? And obviously, part of the answer to that question is it has to be adapted to greater extremes and greater fluctuation. Differences in rainfall, differences in seasonality, differences in the way that that affects pollinators. And one of the things we don't talk about a whole lot is that species are on the move, from microorganisms to pests and diseases. And what we're doing is engaging in a gigantic, unprecedented agricultural experiment where we're throwing together species that have never coexisted before. There will be some surprises. Not sure that they will all be positive. We live, as Stephen Jay Gould said, in the age of bacteria. And I think one of the things that we really haven't started to figure out is how climate change is going to affect soil microorganisms. But that's one of many things that we haven't figured out yet. So if you go back into history, and I think it's useful to think in these terms, about, well, 225 years ago, Malthus came out with published his essay on population. You all know what that was about. He predicted, and he thought this was going to happen fairly soon, that population would outstrip food supplies. It didn't happen. Along came 40 years later, Charles Darwin read Malthus's essay on population. And that was really what triggered Darwin. As he realized that there was variation, that variation gave some individuals a slightly better chance to survive, and that those individuals would therefore have a better chance of passing down those genes to the next generation, and that those traits would become additive, and over time they would come to accumulate and dominate, and thus the origin of new species. So Darwin put together variation, inheritance, natural selection, and time. And if you combine all of those things, you get adaptation or evolution. That's gradual change we can all believe in. Well, you know, with Malthus, I think it's clear that then and now, we wanted and we needed for Malthus to be wrong. That was just in our DNA. Just as I think people who deny climate change today want and need climate change to be wrong. Well, why was Malthus wrong? In part, Malthus was wrong because Darwin was right. Malthus was wrong because Darwin is right in realizing that there is such a thing as adaptation. And we've seen that. In the case of the United States, it's very interesting to go back into our own history and ask ourselves, how did we get the agricultural system we have in the United States, when very few of the crops that we grow today in the United States are native to the United States? We're talking about cranberries and Jerusalem artichokes, a few nuts and berries, and that's about it. Admittedly, they feature prominently in Thanksgiving Day, but they're not the stuff of food security. Well, how did it happen? What happened was that our predecessor to the US Department of Agriculture, which was the Patent and Trademark Office in the 1800s, imported massive quantities of seed and distributed them to farmers. During the Civil War decade, they were distributing 800,000 packages of seed to farmers every year. And this was seeds of diverse crops for experimental purposes. By the end of the century, they were distributing 10 million packages of seeds per year to farmers. So what was actually happening? What was happening was that they had collected this diversity of different crops from all over the world. They were distributing it to farmers, and they were practicing what they had learned, perhaps, from Charles Darwin, which was that if you have diversity, you have variation, and you have natural selection in the hands of the farmers. Over time, you will have adaptation. So we engaged in the 1800s in one of the world's largest ever agricultural experiments. And that is why we have wheat that can grow in all 50 states, and we have this cornucopia of crops from around the world, adapted to so many different environments. We did it then. The question is, I think, can we do it now? Well, today we, in a way, face the same kind of subject or problem, if you will, that Malthus was talking about. And our assumption, I would say, is that technology will once again deliver for us. And I say we're putting our eggs in that basket of technology because historically, how human beings have produced more food is predominantly through two methods. We've cleared more land and enlarged our farms. That's method number one. And until about, I think, the 1980s, that was the dominant method. Since the 1980s, at least, the largest incremental increase in food production has come from intensification of agriculture, growing more on the land we have. And in fact, we have now, if you look at it globally, about half the land in agriculture per capita that we had in 1960. It's a global statistic. So we are clearly going in the direction of intensifying our agricultural production. I don't think that it's inevitable that supply is going to outstrip demand. I think that's in human hands. The question is unanswered. It wasn't inevitable in the past, but it happened in the past. How did it happen in the past? Well, in the past, we did cut down the trees and grow more and create more farmland. But we also have had things like the Green Revolution. We've had BT, we've had drastic increases in planting density of some of our major crops. We've had precision agriculture and no-till. We've had a lot of technologies that have combined. We've had irrigation, we've had chemicals. We've had a lot of technologies that have combined to help us produce more food. But if you look at where things stand today, we also see that yield growth in some of our major crops is declining. Some would say plateauing. We see that the land devoted to agriculture per capita is decreasing. And we see that population is increasing quite dramatically. Africa will be the largest continent on Earth population-wise by the end of the century. So we have a number of challenges. And in fact, I think if you look at where we are today, the challenges we have are historically unique. I think we have a combination of challenges that we've never really seen before. I think there are actually 10 challenges. I'm going to name them real quickly. The first three that we've been talking about so much the last couple of years are the 3 C's: climate change, COVID, conflict. Those are the big ones. But we also are finding that we have water crises in a number of places in the world. 21 of the 36 major world aquifers are in a state of depletion. We know that countries are very interdependent on trade patterns. 131 of 196 countries are net food importers. That means we're all connected on this small planet. We have fairly historically low stockpiles of grain, if you measure that, and certainly in certain ways, certainly if you take China out of the equation. We're losing soil. We're losing soil at a fairly dramatic rate. We're treating soil as if it's an infinite resource, and ironically, the way that we're treating it is making it a finite resource. We are perhaps over-reliant on a few crops and haven't realized the evolutionary potential of the others. We have fairly high, historically high food prices, particularly if you think about local currencies in countries in Africa, for example. And then finally, we haven't kept up with our agricultural research and development funding. Our agricultural research and development funding in this country on an inflation-adjusted basis is back where it was 50 years ago. And yet we're dealing with climate change and a number of other problems. And I'll just throw in one more, which is a problem that we're all going to be dealing with, and that is that last year we had 828 million food insecure people in the world. We don't have any fewer than that now. And yet the media attention to the global food crisis has gone down by about 50% statistically. So people have moved on to the next crisis or no crisis at all, but In fact, we are facing a very stubborn crisis. And that brings us to AgMIP and what we're doing at the State Department and US government. The work that we've done, I think, is nothing short of transformational. It's what we're going to need to change the world. And we started out by focusing on Africa, where the greatest problems of food insecurity exist. We wanted first to ask the question of what are the most important crops for nutrition in Africa, because if you're going to transform agricultural systems, you want to do it in that direction of focusing on the crops that are most important for nutrition. Secondly, and this is the stage we're in now, we are modeling those crops for climate change, because at the end of the day, with scarce resources, we want to put our resources, our funds for plant breeding and improvement, for example, into the crops that can give us the most bang for the buck with nutrition for Africa. And that's where we are. This work couldn't be done without you in the room and online with AgMIP. We're co-sponsoring it from the State Department, the African Union, and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. So I'll end there, and just with one final comment, and that is that we know that Darwin was right, and Darwin is still in our corner. In fact, I have a photo of him on my desk at the State Department just to remind me of that. But the question for us maybe is, was Malthus right, or was Malthus wrong? And I would say to you that, first, I don't know the answer to that question. The answer to that question is actually in our hands. So maybe it's not the right question to ask. And maybe it's a question that can't be answered. But I think through radical collaboration, and if we bend that arc of change in the world, that we can keep on ensuring that Malthus was wrong. So thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Very inspiring history and depiction, shaping that history for us in a really meaningful way. I know it's going to spark some good conversation and questions coming up. We now have William Hohenstein here with us. He is director of USDA's Office of Energy and Environmental Policy within the Office of the Chief Economist at USDA. Bill coordinates the department's efforts to address the causes and consequences of climate change, and he focuses on efforts to build climate resilience and sustainable farms, ranches, rural lands, and rural communities, as well as expanding opportunities for conservation and environmental goods. It's a broad, holistic mission, and exactly where we want to see USDA headed. Thank you for being with us, Bill. Bill Hohenstein.
Sure, thank you, Barbara, and I want to thank the organizers for putting me after Carrie. He's a tough act to follow. That was great. Really appreciated your remarks. It's good to be here. I was noting that you introduced me as a policymaker. I'm actually a policy analyst. We support policymakers. When I did work for the IPCC back in the mid-2000s, they actually called me the suit because I was from the policy office. So I'll take policy analyst or policymaker. It's a lot better than being called the suit. I was taking the train up to New York from DC, and it gave me time to think about sort of where AgMIP is and where AgMIP has gone in some of the early days. I can't believe it's AgMIP9. Congratulations, Cynthia. I can remember Cynthia coming into my office and trying to convince me about the importance of this work. And I've got to say, we were supportive.
Yes, yes.
But to be fair, I think we were also not all in. And I've also got to say that in many ways, I think we underestimated you, and we underestimated this process. We underestimated what it can be. But we're not here to talk about where we've gone, where we've come from. I want to spend a little time talking about sort of what's ahead. And Carrie talked about the global challenges and climate adaptation. As Barbara mentioned, we work on both the causes and consequences of climate change. And dealing with adaptation, you're dealing with the consequences, focusing on mitigation, focusing on the causes. And it is important to understand and accept the role that agriculture plays as a driver of greenhouse gas emissions and the work we have ahead. We have a Paris Agreement to implement. That is front and foremost of our work here at USDA. And to do that, we need to have a sound quantitative and analytic basis to support decision-making. This is where you all come in. We're going to be investing in improving our mitigation, modeling, and analysis, our ability to analyze and assess strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, increase carbon sequestration, generate low carbon renewable energy. And the modeling community will have a lot to say. We can do simple analysis of costs and benefits, but really to get at some of the nuance and the importance of the interactions, we need to be able to assess things in a more systematic and holistic way, accounting for second order effects, trying to identify optimal pathways. And the economics and the modeling community can be really helpful in addressing that. Things like land competition. Is it better to put land into conservation or to intensify production and generate feedstocks that can create low carbon fuels? What's the role that productivity will play? How do we assess not just today's technologies, but emerging technologies? So a lot of work ahead of us. The models that we're looking at to assess mitigation are only as good as their inputs. And there we have a tremendous amount of work to do. It's not so much garbage in, garbage out. It's if the technology isn't in the model to begin with, it can't be part of the solution from the model. And I know that sounds simple to you all, but it does take some explaining when you're talking to some of the decision makers. So things like enhanced efficiency fertilizers, feed additives, addressing organic soils, understanding the impact of cover crops on productivity. All these things are really critical, not just to understand, but to have reflected in our models and tools so they can be reflected in the solutions that we're proposing. So a lot of work to do ahead of us to create what we're calling these sort of production systems, these climate smart production systems that we want to see embedded in the economic models that we're going to use to support our decision making. The other piece of work on our economic modeling front, when we're looking at mitigation, is to focus on the important role that innovation will play. Not just today's technologies and not just the technologies that we know are in the pipeline, but if we're looking at a problem like climate change, which is an intergenerational problem, we have to also be thinking about what will future technologies look like, what will that potential be, and what are the policies and systems that can actually drive and influence the direction that those policies take. Really critical, hard problems to address, hard to integrate into our modeling. But if we don't do that, and we have a history here, we tend to overestimate what it will cost to actually achieve some of these solutions. So what are we doing about that at USDA? Well, we're going to be investing in this. Just this week, on Monday, we released a new set of marginal abatement cost curves for mitigating greenhouse gases in the ag sector. This is our third attempt at doing this. We released cost curves back in 2013 and 2016. We've updated them based on all of the analysis we did for the administration in the run-up to the Inflation Reduction Act and the Build Back Better Act and their policy analysis. So we've done quite a bit of work to update the costs of these technologies, the benefits, the greenhouse gas reductions, and all of that we're now making public. The second thing we're doing is that we are planning to invest in modeling systems over the next 5 years. So working with model developers to create these new production systems that are climate smart and climate friendly, embed them into these economic models so they're choices and options for solutions. It's a big effort. It will require entirely new modeling platforms. It's a lot of work, but we're going to be investing in this in the long run. And we would like to cooperate with this community as we move forward. So the other major area of investment for us in our mitigation strategy is this work of MMRV. It used to be called greenhouse gas inventories back in the day, but basically, how do we quantify the greenhouse gas impacts of activities within the ag sector? How do we measure them? How do we monitor them? And how do we report on them? Turns out this isn't simply about tracking our progress or assessing our performance. It's a critical component to our mitigation strategy itself. So when we assess what we need to do within the ag sector, just within the US, to achieve our Paris commitments, it will require roughly $30 billion of investment in the ag sector to help farmers transition to low carbon strategies. You know, to be successful within the US, what constitutes conventional agriculture in 2030 will need to be very different than it is today. You know, with the typical farmer using cover crops, using enhanced efficiency fertilizers, putting marginal lands in buffers, certainly using no-till or low-till, using feed additives, wide adoption of anaerobic digesters. All of this will take investment, a lot of investment. How is that going to happen? Sure, the government can cover some of this, and certainly under the IRA, we'll have $20 billion of new conservation funding, but that still falls short of, you know, what we think we'll need as a sector. And so it's going to take thinking creatively about how we create those incentives for farmers. The private sector is going to have a major role to play in that. You know, we've launched a program called the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities. And here we think that consumers can play a role by using their purse, by preferentially choosing commodities or end-use products that have a lower carbon footprint, and we can market those things. You can think of low carbon beef or climate-friendly milk, things that you might see at the grocery store, where it might cost a consumer a few pennies more, but that funding can go back to the farmer and help transition them to lower carbon production practices. The other opportunity is the voluntary carbon offset market. And there too, you know, it's connecting demand that might be in the private sector to, you know, the ability of farmers to supply cost-effective, low-carbon offsets. Both of those strategies rely on one thing: confidence. If a consumer is going to purchase a low-carbon gallon of milk, they want to be assured that they're buying a low-carbon gallon of milk. If a company is going to buy a voluntary carbon offset credit, they want to be confident that it's a real credit and it means something. And this is where our MMRV strategy comes in. Again, it's not simply about doing the accounting and tracking our progress. Having reliable, quantitative, confident numbers is critical to our mitigation strategy itself. So what are we doing about that? Well, luckily, Congress agreed. We have resources again within the Inflation Reduction Act to focus specifically on improving our greenhouse gas quantification systems. And with that, we're going to be collecting a tremendous amount of data. We're going to be collecting soil carbon data. We're going to be collecting data on nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizer. We're going to be collecting data on methane and nitrous oxide from manure and emissions from the cattle themselves. And we're going to be using all that data to improve how we quantify the emissions through fairly complex models, soil carbon models, so models like DECENT and DNDC that quantify nitrous oxide emissions, the models that we use to quantify livestock. Here again, there's a role for potentially to work with groups like AgMIP. There's not one model or one tool that's perfect. All of these models have good and maybe not so great components. We need to be able to run them through their paces. We need to identify where they work well and what we can draw from. So when we think about how AgMIP does its work, and I think somebody talked about the AgMIP approach, we also need to be thinking, is that the best approach for what we're trying to do? Certainly modeling or comparison can be helpful. You know, when you run two models, why are they different? What's going on? We also could think about ensemble modeling, where you basically say, well, let's, you know, take the results of multiple models, lump them together, and we should have a more robust solution. Then finally, there's sort of the next step on that, which is thinking about hybrids or amalgams, where you identify the attributes of these models that are better, that perform better in representing the process, and pull them out and use them to improve maybe the next generation of models, or have modelers collaborate and share this insight. And so, thinking about that I in AgMIP, it's not simply intercomparison. It could be intercomparison and improvement. So that might be sort of a next step for where AgMIP goes. These are big challenges. This is hard work. We certainly understand it. And certainly the policymakers and the public is looking to you for answers. That's true as well. I will also say that I've learned one thing, and that's not to underestimate you. So realize there's a lot of work ahead, but I'm confident that working together, the approach that you've identified and used within the AgMIP program, we're going to need to be relying on as we address these real big challenges. So thank you.
Great, thank you both so much. So we've got about 10, 12 minutes for some questions, comments that you might have of your own, reflections that you might have based on this thoughtful dialogue that they brought forward, presentations, and so I invite both those online. I'm not sure how many we have. Sometimes we have the Hollywood squares up and you can see it's quite a few. But folks online, if there's anyone, you can put it in the chat, or we'd be happy to have you pipe in. And yeah, so just for the keynotes. Okay, we have a couple of questions here in the room. Anything online? Anyone coming forward with a question online? Okay, go ahead. If you don't mind, stand up and.
Yeah. Thanks. Herman Lotzekamp from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Thanks very much for your talks. Very inspiring. I'm a bit puzzled. In neither of the talks, if I have missed anything, you talked about anything about demand side change. You only talked about production. And I would say we have a lot of scenarios already that showing the biggest lever to address the challenges you mentioned is actually changing demand side behavior. So that may not go down well in policy, but we'll come out with more studies showing you need to do something on the demand side. And I would argue there's probably no such thing as climate smart dairy nor climate smart beef. In the end, it's all about more vegetables, more vegetables, more vegetables. That's the big challenge. Otherwise, without addressing that, I think I'm pretty confident to say, based on what we have done so far, our scenarios, you will not succeed in addressing those challenges, neither in the US nor anywhere else.
Well, that's putting it clearly.
Yeah, I think that was directed at me. So, okay, so I think we did mention the demand side. I think the whole concept of the Climate Smart Commodities program does focus on demand, but putting that aside and focusing specifically on your question about diet. The livestock sector is responsible for about 3% of US greenhouse gas emissions. Certainly we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by shifting diets. It's going to be hard to do. Let me just say that. I saw data, there was a podcast called Hot Farm. It's actually pretty good if you have a chance to listen to it. It tackles this question. Back in the 1980s, 5% of the US population were vegetarian. Today, 5% of the US population are vegetarians. It's very difficult to get people to shift to be completely vegetarian in their diet. And the people are going to have a say in this. That doesn't mean that changing diet and shifting diet can't have climate benefits. Certainly within protein, some forms of protein have lower greenhouse gas profiles than others. But we'd also like to say that we're not going to convince a dairy farmer in New York to improve their performance by saying, we don't want their product, or we don't think their product is part of the solution. In fact, the dairy industry is very proactive in saying, how do we actually improve the greenhouse gas performance of milk production through on-farm solar, through improved feedstock practices, by capturing methane from digesters. And I know you're shaking your head, but one of the biggest reasons why livestock is a great source of greenhouse gas emissions is because there's such variance in emissions per unit of output. And so that's an important parameter. Can we improve the productivity of livestock so we're not creating emissions from waste? And can we reduce the greenhouse gas intensity of production through the use of technologies? It's not to say that diet can't be part of the solution. There are lots of things we can do working with farmers within their systems where they can see themselves as part of the solution that are going to be important.
Carrie, do you want to say a little bit on demand side adjustments?
Yeah, well, I think it's neither a question just of supply or a question just of demand. I think those two things are interrelated. And I know in the work that we're doing with AgMIP on traditional and indigenous crops in Africa, one could argue that there's a good bit of latent demand for those crops. They have, after all, been grown in Africa for maybe 10 to 12,000 years and consumed there. But if you don't find them in the marketplace, it's hard to measure demand for them sometimes. So, and it's hard to measure demand if in a situation where we've dumped huge amounts of money into promoting certain crops at the expense of other crops. So we don't know what the competitive nature, I mean, the demand is out of whack, frankly. When you think of maize versus millet and sorghum in Africa, what do we know about the potential, and how do those three crops function in the marketplace if you put a huge amount of money into breeding improved varieties of one crop and not so much into the others? But I guess at the end of the day, a more honest answer for you would be that I try to boil it down to the most simple observation I can make, and that is that at the end of the day, we're not going to have food security in the world based on poor soils and unadapted crops. It's just not going to happen. Nor are we going to have good nutrition based on 10 or 12 crops. We need a much greater variety. So, and this a little bit addresses your question there, one of the things that AgMIP is helping us do is to model these traditional and indigenous crops. Yes, some cereals, a lot of legumes, a lot of vegetables, nuts, fruits, etc., because nutrition in places like Africa, where you have food insecurity, depends on having a broad range of crops, as does resilient agriculture, frankly, and it depends on having food 12 months of the year and not just for the periods that any particular crop is growing. And I guess the final thing I would have to say is a personal observation that coming to the State Department, it's always very possible to say, well, you should be doing more. And yes, when there are 828 million food insecure people in the world, I wouldn't want to argue that we can't do more or shouldn't be doing more. But it's also true that one needs to focus. And I certainly, coming into the State Department in a small office of global food security there, have experienced that. And there you have to focus on where your own comparative advantage lies and where your value lies. And in the case of what we're doing at the State Department, I think that promoting these traditional and indigenous crops in Africa and focusing on climate adaptation for crops and improvements for soil health and fertility is probably what we ought to be doing at this moment.
Okay, I saw another question here in the audience. I see there's 30 plus people online, so I want to invite those online. Please do come forward with your questions or put them in the chat for us. Where was our other question, Eric? Sorry?
Thank you very much for your speeches. Corey, I have a question for you. My name is Yannis Athanasiadis from Wageningen University. I was intrigued by your comments about high food prices. While prices are getting higher, still all the peers in food supply chains are poor. And that means that they don't have enough money to innovate. How does it affect our speed of adaptation? I wonder if you had a comment on that. Thank you very much.
I think I should get that one to Bill.
Yeah.
Can you take it?
Sure. Let me understand exactly your question about it. So
Prices are high, but
Yeah.
still farmers, agricultural companies don't have a lot of margin, so they cannot have profits to innovate. So that means that we don't adapt, we don't innovate as fast as we could.
yeah, so I actually think the sector has a very strong track record of innovation and investment in improved productivity. I think Carrie's right to point out that there are, within the public sector, there may be some shortfalls in terms of research and how that can affect the future productivity gains. There's another aspect to innovation that's really critical, and that is you can create innovations that will improve productivity but not reduce greenhouse gas emissions or not make systems more adaptable. Having the right policy signals to incentivize greenhouse gas reductions and having the foresight within the research community to be thinking about adaptation will change sort of not just the pace of innovation, but the direction of innovation. And that's critical as well. You might be talking more about a short-term phenomena with what we're facing right now with high food prices and low margins and the effect that that might have on capital that's available to innovate. But I think for addressing problems like this, it's important to kind of take the longer run and to be thinking about how do you structure policies that will create the market incentives to companies to innovate, but not just innovate in one direction, but to really focus on these multiple aspects of what we think of as climate smart systems.
Okay, 2 more questions and then we're going to proceed to the panel. Yes. Can you share that?
I just wanted to hear Bill talk about, in the light of the demand question, do you feel like the very disparate jobs of USDA are in communication with each other on climate issues?
Well, I'm really happy to come up here. No, I don't. So it is, I think I did mention this challenge that if you want farmers to be part of the solution, you have to actually offer them pathways to be parts of the solution, right? So, pitching them with an idea of we don't think that what you produce can be part of the solution is not a great way to get them to the table. That said, we work with all aspects of civil society, and there certainly are folks that are thinking about how do we transform diet and how do we make diets, a driver of improved sustainability. And I think we can encourage that as well. It's just a matter of balance, and the role for the government, potentially, leading this diet discussion isn't a role for USDA. That may be a role for the environmental community or other agencies or the academic community. I think we want to understand the numbers and the implications and what's really the potential, because when I look at some of the analysis of the effects of diet on mitigation, we want to make sure we're dealing with sound numbers.
Yeah, Christoph Müller, also Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Very similar question. What evidence would you want from science, from us, to acknowledge that the system has to change, and yes, not everybody is going to like it? What do we have to deliver to make that move?
Well, I mean, I think some of it would be behavioral studies, right? So, what's the likelihood of the public to adopt these changes in diet? What are some of the barriers to that? That would be helpful. How do you work with farmers that are producing milk or beef? And how do you convince them that they're part of the solution? And then what is the technical and economic potential? We see lots of, we can get lost in the importance of this. When we talk to the general public, you don't want to leave them with the impression that if they don't eat a hamburger, then they're solving the climate problem. Whereas, much of what their emissions profile and their greenhouse gas footprint is associated with is their energy consumption. What car they drive, how much energy what form of energy they use to heat and drive their house. So, it's important to think about diet and its role in a mitigation strategy, but it's also important not to overemphasize it, given all the components of the green of the climate system.
Great. Okay, let's add some more voices to this discussion. I'm going to ask our panelists to go ahead, and we're going to have more time for questions and discussion, especially if we get through these 5 minutes. And you're staying; they'll be right here with us. Okay, so come on up if you don't mind as we. Yeah, okay. And we're going to speak directly into the microphone.
No, I mean, just again to show the panel.
Yes. So Lance Lillibridge is the chairman of the Iowa Corn Growers Association. He is a first-generation family farmer, has a farm in Benton, Iowa, about 1,400 acres in corn, 100 acres in hay, and he manages red Angus cow-calf a herd. His wife Heidi and his daughter Tess and son Ty all manage this with him. So welcome, Lance. Hayden Montgomery is online with us again. Hayden, I don't know if we'll get to see you, but soon we will. And you've heard Hayden's introduction many times. Very much a member of this community, agricultural program director for the Global Methane Hub. He previously served as special representative to the Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases, as well as he was New Zealand's ambassador to Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Before these appointments, he also worked in New Zealand with the Ministry of Agriculture. So welcome again, Hayden. Pauline Schielbeck is here. She is Associate Professor in Nutritional Epidemiology and Planetary Health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Welcome, Pauline. She is Director of the WHO Collaborating Center on Climate Change, Health, and Sustainable Development, and her research focuses on discovering healthy, sustainable, resilient, and realistic solutions that will accelerate transformational food system change. Pauline leads the Sustainable and Healthy Diets in Europe project and also co-leads Sustainable and Healthy Food Systems in the UK, India, and South Africa, among many other projects. Welcome, Pauline. Allison Thompson is also here with us. She is a program director for the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research. She joined in 2022, early 2022. But she brings more than 20 years of experience in agriculture and climate change research. Prior to that, she was working as a scientist studying climate impacts and identifying mitigation and adaptation solutions for agriculture at the Pacific Northwest National Lab. Most recently, she was leading metrics development to advance agricultural supply chain sustainability field to market. Welcome, Allison. So we're going to go give each one of them an opportunity for a few moments of comments and proceed down the line with each of the three, and then we'll open it up for some more questions and discussion. Lance.
All right, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the invite, Cynthia. It was amazing. I was pretty excited when I got that email. And so I'm Lance Lillibridge. I'm from Benton County, Iowa, farm in between Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and Waterloo, right around the Cedar River. And I am a corn farmer, and I do serve as the chairman of the Iowa Corn Growers Association, which is about 7,000 members. And so I also represent all the farms that provide funds for our checkoff. And anyways, I would love to just share a couple things about my farm real quick and about what we do. So, and what's on the mind of farmers as well. So as you can see by the slides here, what's the average producer's state of mind? And when we talk about stakeholders, the average producer is not overly trustworthy of a lot of things because of some of exactly what you said, that the way to get a farmer to make change is not to tell him that he's got a bad product or it doesn't work. We know that we're good stewards, and we're always looking to do better, and we do need to justify ourselves to outsiders. And so that's a big thing for me. And several years ago, I had that realization and said, hey, I need to do something different. And so when I decided to do something different, who can I trust? That's the same thing that producers think in Iowa as well. Who can I trust? I know that my data is valuable, and it's mine. I'm going to keep it close to me, and it's valuable. I don't want folks to use it against me. Such as the Chicago Board of Trade or the USDA, right? We do like to share data, but we have to be careful about it. So anyways, one of the things that I was able to do when I made changes to my farm was I was able to find a partner, a company called SEC, Sustainable Environmental Consultants. Why I trusted them is because they didn't sell anything. They weren't buying anything. And I felt like I could have a relationship with them. And it might be a little bit hard to see on here, but some of the changes that I made on my farm, Carrie, you hit the nail on the head about the soils. Farmers aren't always paying attention to that. They're taking it for granted. In 2008, we had a 500-year flood in my area, and I seen a lot of my farm going away. I said, I need to do something different. And so I did. And the results are here on this page. You can see there's a spot there where my average soil erosion rate is 0.34 tons per acre. The state of Iowa is 5.9 tons per acre. The national average is like 4.8 tons per acre. So that's a big deal, and that's a huge deal, and it made me feel a lot better about what I was doing as a farmer. It made me feel like I had value in my product. And one of the other things here, we look at in-field practice comparisons, where we're at with environmental outcomes. We're negative on the soil GHGs. The soil carbon sequestration at about 1/4 ton per acre. Those are big deals to me. Those are big deals to other people. But I didn't know this until I found a partner that could quantify and verify it. And so that was a big deal. Again, here you can kind of see those erosion rates. Puts it a little bit more in perspective. And those outcomes, 871 fewer tons of CO2 is equivalent of 169 passenger cars. That's putting things in layman's terms for people to understand that are in my community, and for them to go, seriously? Wow, that's pretty cool. What did you do? How'd you do that? And other farmers ask me the same question. What did you do? How did you do that? So I feel like I've been able to influence some of those people to make changes. And I think that's super important, but I couldn't do that without this. And I think that that's important in your community, is that you provide tools to us farmers where we can tell our story, where we can quantify and verify it, because we can talk BS all day and it's not worth anything. But if I've got something that I can say, hey, this is real, it's quantifiable, it's verifiable, that makes all the difference in the world. So I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
And before you get away, Bill, sorry, Lance, we're going to ask you to talk a little bit about what you're doing with AgMIP on your farm and in the state of Iowa and some of those interactions, because it's really been exciting to see it develop. I'm sorry, let's go to next. Hayden, you're up next if you're available.
I'm here.
Yes. Wonderful.
You can hear me okay, can you?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to participate virtually. I would have liked to have been there in person, but I am trying to reduce my travel to the extent possible. It was part of my job change, was to try and have the opportunity to travel less. So I just want to offer some thoughts on 4 themes and the role of AgMIP, I guess, with respect to those themes. The first being data, the idea of comms or communication, capability, and then relevance. So in terms of data, and this has been well emphasized already by the previous keynote speakers, but I think one area that I think AgMIP can be extremely helpful, and I think the modeling community in general, and it's potentially a bit of a double-edged sword, because in doing this, it could lead to lack of confidence in the results of the current models. But I do think it's really important that where there are critical gaps in primary data that currently points of weaknesses of models, they should be clearly articulated and signaled so that resources can go to address those primary data gaps, and in doing so reduce uncertainties and improve the models. I understand maybe there's reluctance to do that in some cases, but I think it's very important for the general sort of society or policymakers to really understand that we don't have all the answers and we don't have certainty on everything. And it maybe gives a false sense of certainty because the models are quite sophisticated and there has been a lot of work done, but we do know there are major gaps out there. So, of course, the other role of models is to fill gaps in data. So it's an important function that is served. And of course, integrating data of multiple scales to make sense of that for decision making and for other actors to take decisions. On the communications piece, I think, and this is something I reflect on from my previous role in the Global Research Alliance, which is similar in a way to AgMIP, and that is that it's a distributed community of individuals passionate about the topic, networking themselves, and then struggling to find the resources to advance on the priorities that they as networks and groups identify. And because it is a distributed network and it doesn't have a sort of bricks and mortar infrastructure and an office somewhere and permanent professional staff, it does have challenges when it comes to communicating your impact, expressing views or positions about an issue as a community, and convening the various voices into a unified voice is extremely challenging, and maybe something that would never be done. But I do think it's really important to find ways to ensure that the impact you have had over the last decade or more is demonstrated and can be transparently demonstrated. And the importance of the ongoing work is made very clear to people as well. And this of course, is extremely relevant to ongoing resourcing. In terms of capability, I did see a comment in the chat, and I don't know to what extent this has been discussed there in New York, but it's really, really important, and particularly when I look at this from the perspective in my current role around greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, and in particular methane. It's really important that we have the scientific community in low and middle income countries engaged directly in this work and find ways to support and resource their participation. And I don't know to what extent there is a good balance of geographic distribution, etc., and the participants there in person. But I know from my time in the GRA, it's an ongoing issue of weaker capability, lack of resources in the global south, and it's really, really necessary that we address that, given where most emissions are currently emitted and where future emissions are projected to grow. And then just finally on the relevance question, this has been discussed mostly with respect to policy relevance, but I would add in there, the farmer and industry side as well. And I won't repeat what was said by Bill, but certainly we have to have models that are fit for purpose and that do reflect, modern production systems and technologies that are possibly going to be utilized within those. But I think the point I'd like to make mostly is, there's a lot of discussion about food system and transformation, and there are some very, very big transformations being proposed. And I think it's really, this community in particular is vital in ensuring that those big transformations don't turn out to be big mistakes. And it's really incumbent on this community to understand the implications of such proposed transformations with respect to resilience and vulnerability of the food system from a climate shocks, climate impacts perspective, the nutritional security dimension, which may be slightly disguised by some of the hype of some of the proposed solutions, and of course, amongst other things, the greenhouse gas implications of proposed transformations and land use implications of proposed transformations. And so I think, that's an ongoing role that is without doubt important, but I'm not sure that's widely appreciated from those people you might be seeking to fund the ongoing work. And just finally, on the greenhouse gas aspects in particular, I think that this community should try and have a lot more emphasis on integrating the mitigation aspects with the tradition of AgMIP, which has been much more around the climate impacts on the crop yields. And it is great to see that there is progress there with the MACB project, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. So we look forward to how that might be growing on the in the AgMIP agenda over the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayden. Pauline.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for the invite to be part of this this panel today. When I spoke to Barbara and also to Cynthia and saw the keynote speakers before us, and then the wealth of experience on the panel, I didn't really feel in any position to speak any words of wisdom. So instead, I wanted to share a couple of observations of working, and of course, as you might know, we work very much on the nutrition, diets, and health side of things. I'm not a crop modeler, but a health modeler. And we do interact a lot with policymakers in our work. We do interact a lot with stakeholders, and there were a few things that I noticed, and I'm not sure if these might be helpful in driving this agenda forward, but I thought it was quite a nice discussion point to start off with. And so in 2019 in the UK, the National Food Strategy was developed. This was a report which brought together nutrition, but also environmental sustainability, economy, in an attempt to not just talk about diets or talk about production, but to kind of bundle it together in food. And we were approached by the UK government to do some of the modeling here. And so we modeled different scenarios of dietary change. We looked at what would happen if there were subsidies or on fruits and vegetables, for example, or there were taxations on or other fiscal measures on other foods, and what would be the impact on health of the population in the UK, and how would that change the dietary footprints and the overall food system emissions in the UK. It was a very interesting exercise. We worked together. We used all kinds of different models and developed a new model for this. Worked together with the HSC in the UK. And these were adopted in the National Food Strategy, which was then used to develop the UK food strategy from this independent review. This was work that we didn't necessarily were planning on doing. It wasn't something that we were working on before already, but it really drove our agenda. And so now, and on the right-hand side, you probably can't read what is in there, but it's one of the projects that we are working on in looking at how, if we were to change the demand side for plant-based foods, fruits, vegetables, legumes, there are very many different ways of doing it. Also not in the last place, because if everyone in the UK, for example, wanted to eat five day in terms of fruits and vegetables, there's at the moment not enough supply, so different ways of upping that supply. And so it's been an interesting journey, but it was originally initiated by a question from policymakers, whereas that was completely different to some of the work that we did and I've just picked an example from a project that we have done in the Gambia, Face Africa, Food System Adaptations in Changing Environment, where the London School has an MRC, Medical Research Unit, a council unit in the Gambia, and as you may know, there's a lot of food insecurity in the Gambia, and so we launched a project with our Gambian partners to look at options for these. How we could change the food system to increase the resilience and increase the sustainability, and look at sustainable development pathways in the Gambia. Whilst we had lots of policymakers on board, the engagement was wasn't very frequent, and also quite a bit of push from us, and not so much a pull from their side, until we started putting things in very simple. And here you see it's one of the Shiny apps. It's work that my colleague Tony and also my colleague Felicity Addo at IASA have developed. A very simple app to sort of show this to them. And this is what all of a sudden sparked the attention. So it was a very visual representation where people could change all kinds of different parameters and see what happened with food supply to the Gambia, and that very much sparked an interest. And we ended up with a national event with, I believe, almost 100 policymakers from Department of Health, Environment, and climate, all together in one room, plus lots of different NGOs and activist groups even. And so I thought it was quite interesting how sort of both worked, both were quite impactful, but they were very different. And so it's something that we could discuss in what works when, and how, what's the right moment to engage. Then another group that we engage a lot with is, of course, because we're in the nutrition and diets corner, is with consumers. And this is often done through our public advisory groups, or they're also called in health research patient-public involvement groups, or public patient involvement groups, PPIs. And these are people that are interested in the topic, are very happy to sit on a panel. And this is usually the first thing that is done as soon as the contracts are signed and the project is started. These people are recruited. So an advertisement goes out and people apply, and usually we even have to select quite strictly, because we get hundreds of applications. And this has been very informative for all of the work that we are doing. And it I think in every single project, multiple times, we got a completely different angle to the problem that we were tackling, and which changed our research objectives or methods or scenarios or models that we were creating quite significantly. And it's been, really instrumental in our work. For example, we do something on quite a bit of work on substitutions and role of alternative proteins. What we set out is absolutely not to do is absolutely not what we did after we met with the Planet Group quite a few times. So these were, I just wanted to share these and very happy to discuss further. And that's it for me.
Great, thank you, Pauline. Allison. You bet. Yes, you can stay right there. Okay.
The button? Okay, I've hit the button. All right, that's better. Hi, everyone. Allison Thompson. I'm with the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research. I did start off many years ago as a crop modeler. So dropping the name, I worked with Cesar Useralde for a number of years on climate impacts work, as well as soil carbon and bioenergy work within the Department of Energy. I had great opportunities to work with integrated assessment modelers and climate modelers there as well, and was, somewhat sideline involved in very early days of AgMIP. So just first off, it's so much fun to come back. And I've of course been able to see like all of the publications and science advances and all that have been made. But coming here today, you also see the community and the culture of collaboration that has grown out of this. And it's really fantastic. And I'm really excited to see where that goes. So just congratulations to all of you for making all of that happen. It's really fun for somebody who's been out and then coming back. So my own experience is having worked there in the modeling space and doing a lot of the work that I know you all are advancing and doing as well. I took the step about 9 years ago to go into the nonprofit sector to say, you know what, I'm kind of interested in seeing, we've got all these solutions to climate change. We understand what the impacts might be. The economists and the integrated assessment modelers are telling us these are the transformations that should happen with price changes and all of this, but we're not actually seeing that happen. So can we go talk to the farmers? So I took the step and went to a nonprofit organization called Field to Market, which works across the value chain. And my third day on the job, they dropped me in Commodity Classic, which is kind of the equivalent of Lance coming here, which is sort of the largest farmer convention in the US. It's like, if you want to learn how to talk to farmers here you go, try, So like from that point, it's been a fantastic learning experience. And I've worked across the value chain with the farmers, but also with the agribusinesses, the food companies, the NGOs, large and small, who work with and support farmers and scientists in this space as well. And about a year and a half ago, I came to the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research to lead a new program on climate smart agriculture. So FAR has been around since about 2015, authorized in the Farm Bill, provided funding by Congress in order to match that funding with non-federal sources and accelerate research in food and agriculture. So trying to address the need for increased funding in food and agriculture research by seeding private sector investment with federal investment. So we are not federal employees. We work for a nonprofit, but our grants come partially from federal funds and then partially from private sector partners. Since 2015, 2016, we've worked with close to 600 different organizations that match that funding. So that means we create, every day we're working with partners across the entire industry to think about what are the research needs that they have that align with the science needs that are coming from the community and make grants to support that work. One of the ways we work is through consortia, so bringing together industry partners who have common interests, and they all provide funding, and FAR will match that to support research in something that's in a pre-competitive space that might be too risky for any industry to take on their own, but working together, they can kind of make advances in the research space. The climate smart agriculture space that we're in is a little bit new. I will say a couple things about, I guess, what I've observed the private sector interest in climate smart agriculture really being, right? So both at Field to Market and at FAR, I've worked with a number of food companies, so multinational food companies, and you may see them from time to time making commitments. They want to be carbon neutral or climate smart or reduce emissions, whatever it is, they're setting targets, they're getting those verified through Science-Based Targets Initiative, they're working with various companies to create and verify programs that are reducing their emissions across the board. One of the hardest things for these food companies then is that they're sourcing all of their ingredients from farmers. It's much harder to look at reducing the emissions from all the thousands of farmers growing the wheat that grows into your crackers than it is to look at running your factory on renewable energy, right? So they have this big challenge of how can they meet those climate targets by working across with all of these farming communities. They also, at the same time that they have these interests, of course, and commitments that they have to meet in order to, be good corporate actors and all of that, they are also very interested from a business perspective in ensuring the future food supply, right? We're talking about companies that have been in business selling food for hundreds of years and would like to continue to do that in the future. But they see that climate change is a real threat to their supply chains, to the ability of our farmers to continue to produce and all of this, and what's the impact and the cost going to be. So we see them interested in both mitigation and adaptation or resilience. So we see a lot of motivation there. The thing I would say that one of the greatest challenges we have in this space is matching up the timescales. We see a lot of urgency from the private sector. They want to act now. They want, Bill is nodding yes. He's working with them all as well. They want it to happen now. They want to know the solution and go out and implement it. But we as scientists are saying, well, we say we'll just have everybody go to no-till. Well, in fact, that's not always, in fact, going to be your best system in terms of reduced emissions, right? You actually need to do the science and understand where that's an appropriate practice. What are the appropriate practices where? And then help farmers to adapt them. The way that we are approaching this through the program we have on climate smart agriculture is with the idea that by collaborating with farmers and farming communities, you can devise the solutions that actually work scientifically and also work for the farmers. So not going at this from the stage of saying, okay, we're going to implement these solutions that scientists have come up with, but we're going to in fact support scientists to go work with farmers on climate smart systems, taking into account, their unique systems, the barriers they might have to adopting some of these practices, their needs, what they've already experimented with. So really a co-creation, co-design approach. And our theory is that by working in collaboration to devise strategies, they will be more readily adopted at the endpoint as well, because the farmers will have had some say in them, they'll have some agency, you will be able to work with and create the farmer sort of champions for these systems and the leaders like Lance in the community who can then help to get that knowledge out to to the producers they work with through their networks and so on. So that's really the approach we're taking within the program called AgMIP9. We have some other work going on as well, but I'm happy to talk about all the public-private partnership work as we get going in the Q&A.
Great, thank you so much. Really different perspectives. Excellent to hear different programs, different kinds of science, other kinds of partner integration, not policy, but with partners. And tremendous experience, really. Coming from London, it's really great to hear about your project. So we appreciate your time on that. Shall we take some questions? Questions can be for anyone on the panel, for our two keynote speakers. Let's see if there's anybody online. Do let us know. Couple here in the room. Just let us know who you are and if you have your question directed to someone specific.
All right, I'm Dominique van der Mensbroek, professor at Purdue University. This is for Lance, so really interesting presentation. You didn't talk about the cost, so I presume this is the changes you made are win-win. I wanted to know, associated with that, whether there were any government programs that, helped you, with the changes, and then the scaling up question, which is, I guess, what Allison was talking about as well.
Sure, thanks for the question. There was no government programs that helped me, none whatsoever. I was completely motivated by myself, just for the simple fact that I was losing my farm because it was washing away, it was eroding away the way I did things. And so I took a look at it economically and said, okay, what iron do I need to get rid of? And what iron do I need to replace it with to make a change, to do something different? And it was going to cost me some money, but I also knew that it was going to potentially cost me some yield drag. There was going to be a huge learning curve, and I needed to mentally prepare myself for that and make sure I had resources that I could manage through a couple of years and hopefully figure it out. What I came to was that if this doesn't work within 5 years, I'm not going to do it. And the first year was very difficult. The second year was difficult. And I almost quit after the second year. I'm like, I don't know if I can continue to do this. But the third year, I got it figured out. And what I learned, and I didn't tell anybody this earlier, but what I learned was I was over applying fertilizer using a strip till program. And you cannot fertilize with the same amount of fertilizer in a strip till program. You have to reduce it. And what I found out is that I've reduced my fertilizer inputs by 45% and my yields are going up. My soil health is getting better. My organic matter is getting better. I mean, everything is getting better. I don't think I've made a plateau. It continues to grow. So hopefully that answers your question.
On the scaling up, why aren't your colleagues doing this?
Maybe speak a little bit to the degree that you do see them taking this up, and how is that going in Iowa at least?
So to begin with, I had people laughing at me and lining up to be at the farm sale when I failed. But that changed, and they're like, wow, okay, maybe that is gonna work. Maybe it is gonna work. And now I get calls every year, sometimes even monthly, people wanting to know, how are you doing this? How can I do it? And I was probably, I don't know as though I was the first one in my county to do it. I might have been, but now there's all kinds of people in my county that are strip tilling. And I'm not responsible for all of that, but I think I influenced some of it. And not only my county, but counties around me and other people that I've been able to talk to. So it is becoming more and more popular because we are able to show that there is a success doing it.
Great, thank you. We have time for a few more questions. Another one here, and just let me know if there's anybody online. Nobody, okay.
Yeah, Herman Lotzekamp from PIC. I have a question to Hayden. We have talked a lot about carbon farming and carbon storage in the soil. That sounds all very nice. I believe it once I see it, right, credibly. We have not talked a lot about reducing methane and nitrous oxide emissions. And it's well documented in the latest IPCC report. We heard from Bill Hohenstein, we are all subject to the Paris Agreement, right? To reach the Paris Agreement, global methane reductions need to be reduced, methane emissions need to be reduced at least by 50%, and actually the more the better because of the short-lived nature of the gas. Same with nitrous oxides. So Hayden, I don't exactly know what the Global Methane Hub does, but do you know, can you tell us what needs to be done to achieve this 50% plus methane? And to be sure, as much as possible, that's what the IPCC says, right, over the next 30 years, because the less methane reduction we see, the more has to be done in other sectors in carbon dioxide, so we can't escape this projection.
Yes. Do you hear me okay?
And especially agriculture and food sector, of course, in this context.
Can you hear me, just to make sure?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, well, thank you for the question. And I didn't actually speak to the hub when I made my remarks, so it's a good chance to do that. Very briefly, the Global Methane Hub is funded entirely by philanthropic foundations, and it was established in the shadows of the signing of the Global Methane Pledge at COP26. And last year, basically, we're a startup regranter, okay? So we have a pooled fund from foundations, and then we look to use that funding to catalyze action on methane as quickly as possible across energy, waste, and agriculture. Yeah, you're right. The scenarios say that by mid-century, we need to reduce methane from agriculture at least by 50%, at least. And the sooner the better, because as you say, the effects of methane in the short term are significant, and that can sort of maybe buy us a bit of time and at least slow the rate of warming via methane, given its short lifetime. It's going to need a lot of everything being done, right? We're going to need the best practices of animal husbandry, good animal breeding, feeding, the best yield we can possibly get from livestock and from rice production systems. And then it's going to need breakthrough technologies, and it's going to need adjustments on the demand side. Now, those adjustments are going to have to occur in those places where there is overconsumption of some products. But of course, we're going to see increased consumption, and probably need to see, of those same products in regions of the world that are suffering from malnourishment currently. So it's kind of everything. And what we're trying to do in the hub with our relatively limited resources, but resources that we can wield in a very flexible manner, is try to target both the opportunities in the short term to address some of the really glaring productivity gaps that will help us reduce methane intensity, as well as play a role in the pressure on companies and other actors that need to take action, need to think about methane mitigation in the context of their business, or in the case of multilateral development banks, in the context of their loans and grants, and also contribute to the research agenda. We are currently leading an effort on enteric fermentation research. We are trying to mobilize in excess of $200 million to focus on breakthrough technologies for that single largest source of anthropogenic methane. So it's a sort of a balanced agenda. We're trying to work across all relevant fields and really identify what value add we bring, what impact we can have with the funding we have.
Great, thank you so much. I saw another hand.
It's also to Hayden. It's Anthony Whitbread from Hillary. Hayden, the emissions intensity seems to be the mantra around our low and middle income country work. Can you see a future where we start to talk about reducing methane, numbers of animals, even in these sorts of situations?
Well, I think eventually that's going to have to be the case. We, as I say, we have a strategy that encompasses both the intensity but also the absolute. I mean, it's all trying to have absolute reductions, right, in the long term. If we can have very significant reductions in intensity, it all gets a bit of a blurry grey area in the middle, right? Is it actually just reductions in intensity, or is it leading to absolute reductions? And it's sometimes a bit of a false dichotomy, but certainly it's about also being pragmatic and kind of sensitive to the real politics, right? Like, you're not going to go into some of these countries and start to demand absolute reductions today, and nor are you going to have technologies that are becoming close to available used in these systems, because the level of productivity is so low that it just doesn't make any sense. So we see need for kind of embracing the intensity story for a period of time, allowing for transitions to occur that raise productivity, hopefully rationalization of herd sizes where you've got animals that are just not productive, and then you have systems that would theoretically become much more able to absorb maybe more expensive technologies or practices that are emerging. So that's kind of the reason we're looking at both the intensity and the absolute. But you're right, in the longer term, we have to have absolute reductions globally.
Great, thank you. I think you had a question, and we also have a question coming online from Gary for you, Lance.
Thank you. I'm Eric Just from France. I'm working at CIRAT in an institute working in developing countries in tropical systems. I was very interested in the different talks. I would like to thank you very much for inviting Lance, since you are developing a regenerative agriculture, if I well understood. And in some words, it's close to the principle that were agreed by experts on agroecology, by the FAO. We have an agreement to go in an agroecological transition for being climate smart. We believe in that. There are many scientific evidence. So this means that we need to de-intensify some production in most of the developing countries, such as in Europe and of course in US. And we need to intensify the production in, for example, in developing countries, for example, in Africa, where we are working with some other researcher in collaboration. I would like to know, so this means that in the both cases, we need to redesign our system completely and redesign the food system completely. So I would like to know, Bill Hohenstein, if as someone very important in USDA, you are encouraging scientists and agronomists to go in the way of an agroecological transition of agriculture. Thank you for your answer.
Bill, and then we'll turn to the online question. Here we go. Or you could sit if you'd like.
I might sit.
Go right ahead.
That's a great question. And I think you're right to point out some of the benefits of what Lance is doing. When I heard Lance's talk, I thought, wow, there's so many more things that we could talk about. We could talk about, are you applying enhanced efficiency fertilizers? Are you looking at your low productivity sites and thinking about putting them into conservation? Are you using a cover crop? Certainly, strip till is great technology. It works on many farms. It aligns with 4 per mill and efforts to increase soil carbon. I don't think in the U.S. we would call that agroecology. Maybe we would. Maybe it's just semantics. Whether it's regenerative agriculture or agroecology or climate smart systems. I think in the U.S. we are also focused on maintaining and enhancing production and productivity. Our farmers are getting hammered in a discussion about biofuels. And the big issue is by diverting US commodity crops into biofuels, are we driving deforestation in developing countries? Thinking about agroecology, if we lower production in the US, would we be doing the same thing? It's a good question. So there are lots of complex issues, again, that the modeling community, by looking at these second order effects, by evaluating things systematically, I think we can help to address and answer.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, we have a question online quickly for you, if you don't mind, Lance, and then I know you have one final thing you'd like to say. Is reduced fertilizer as a reduced fertilizer strategy for strip tilling confirmed by others? Are you using verification? If so, how much? How many others?
That's what gets people excited about it, is because we're not spending as much money. And so others are doing it and seeing the same results. Now, is there anything scientifically based? No. What we contribute that to is that we have less sodium, salt going into that, and we have less root burn. So it's making a big difference in how we farm. And I hope that answers that question, but it's definitely a thing to use a little less.
Yeah.
And put it in the right spot for the plant to use instead of broadcasting it. Another thing with the strip till is that we're not broadcasting fertilizer. We're not just throwing it haphazardly everywhere and letting a rain event or a weather event take that from the field and wash it down the river and sending it to Louisiana. We're actually putting it in the soil and it's staying there. So, I mean, we've got huge benefits to that. I mean, there's just huge benefits to that. How do we measure all of them? I've showed you one thing that, has got some merit to it, but it could probably be better than this, depending on what that model looks like and how we improve on that model. Somebody asked if I use cover crops. Yes, I do. What I use is radishes, I use turnips, I use alfalfa, I use clover, and I use oats. And I use all of those things and I fly them on with an airplane in August before a rain so that I can get germination. I like that because it's not winter hardy. So it'll kill off in the spring and I don't have to use a chemical to kill it. The other thing I really like about it is that when I've harvested my corn, I can turn my cows out on it and they eat the tops of it. It's a win-win deal.
Yes, fascinating, and really so many great examples and inspiration out of all of your presentations. Did you have just one quick thing for Bill?
Yeah, I was just going to ask Lance. One of the principles, as I understand it, of agroecology deals with GMOs. All right, what kind of corn are you growing?
So I am a true believer in rotating traits, okay? Because we have to, with the GMOs that we do have, we have to make sure that we're not overusing them for one thing and building resistance. But by using different traits or rotating traits or not using any traits at all, I, for 15 plus years, have been able to manage rootworms and not had an issue at all. So to answer your question, I'll use both conventional corn and GMO corn, and I'll rotate that on my farms. Also, by doing that, I've simplified my process and used a conventional herbicide program, which is probably one of the best, safest things there is. And in fact, because of the cover crop I use, I'm not using a glyphosate to get a burn down. Not saying I don't use it at all. Sometimes we do, but very rarely. So, and I do have a question for you. This is a really good one.
The last question, because we do have to rotate to the closing session and our final comments from the exec com.
So my question, Bill, is there's a lot of conversation about methane and what are we doing and what farmers are doing. Does the USDA have anything out there on a website that would show that our farmers are building methane digesters and where they're at and the difference that we're making? Is there anything out there that shows the amount of cover crops that we're using now? We don't get enough credit for what we've been doing, and that's where we have a trust issue. We're getting beat up constantly. Oh, you guys are terrible, dirty farmers. I had a reporter come one day because I was really mad that they had something on the TV about overusing fertilizer. And he came to interview me because I sent him an email, and I challenged him. I said, I tell you what, if we're so dirty, I'm gonna go and get my fertilizer. I'm gonna get a 5-gallon bucket of each, the NP and the K. I'm gonna put it in a bathtub, fill it up with water. I'm gonna take my clothes off and soak on it. You go up to the housing development and go underneath 10 homes and find the same amount of stuff from underneath the kitchen sink, put it in the bathtub, and we'll see who piles out first.
Oh dear.
He did not take me up on that.
No.
So anyways, is there anything that the USDA does?
Yeah, and stay tuned because we're going to be doing more. And you're raising one of the questions that keeps me up at night. And it's, could we actually achieve our goals as a sector within the ag sector and not know it because we're not collecting the data and that data is not reflected in our inventories and our reports? That's a real possibility. Some of the data that's in our current inventory was collected in 2015 when it comes to practices like tillage or fertilizers. So as part of our effort, we say improving the quality, so reducing uncertainties, but also the timeliness and getting more current data into our inventory. And if the US is having a challenge doing that, just many other countries are having that same challenge.
Yes, yes. Wonderful. Well, our thanks to the panel, to Hayden. We appreciate the hour that you're joining us. Hayden is special. Thank you all very much, and we'll move to our closing for the day.
Exec-com, please come up. And we're at the final wrap-up, closing remarks and ways forward. So, yeah, great idea. So, what? Do we need our hats? It's okay. So first, I give farewell greetings from Morven McLean, the chair of our steering council for this week. She had to step away. So I'm going to give a brief report of what the steering council, what was going on in the 3 meetings that we had with the steering council. And the first thing is that we are going to be bringing on a new steering council chair who was here also, Francisco Mesa from Chile. So, but he also had to leave, but that's the new, going forward, that's going to be our chairship. Well, we spent a lot of time discussing and getting great input from the steering council, and thank you to all the members and all the great inputs and feedback, is into something that we're calling AgMIP 2.0. And we are going to be making a strategic plan for the next 3 to 5 years to really see where do we go from here, building on the great decade plus of AgMIP 1.0, but really coming to grapple with how do we maintain the core business of AgMIP with the intercomparisons, the model improvements that we're so good at, and the assessments that we're so good at, but at the same time, going forward and going so much more deeply into stakeholder engagement and outreach to policymakers and really that was so much the topic of discussion through this week of being able to do both, so that the models really can fulfill the kinds of challenges that Bill and Carrie were posing. So with that, we're going to be, in the strategy also, we're going to be working on the structure of the coordinating unit at Columbia University, working on making that more of a, working on how that can be structured in a more effective way. And then, of course, all of this relates to funding and funding strategy, so that we can continue and build the funding streams for all of the AgMIP activities going forward, because that's also what's so completely needed. And then these, I think maybe, do you want to tell about the teams and the shepherds? Because Alex was doing that part. That's the last part. We'll report from the steering council.
Yeah.
Shepherds, get ready for interactions.
So I'll just note, yeah, for each member of the steering council, we have asked them to find AgMIP teams. They could be the research teams, it could be the regional teams that they would like to engage with more deeply. That could help them provide, more robust scientific approaches, could help them connect into broader funding streams, policy contexts, stakeholder engagements, but really just to utilize the experts that we have on the steering council to interact with more teams. We have more teams than we have steering council members, but each of them have started to identify particular teams that they will be engaging with more directly.
Right, and we're going to be hooking you up. So if you get an email about, someone's really interested in what you're doing in your AgMIP team, it's your steering council shepherd. Please be nice to them. And utilize them and call on them, and develop a relationship. They're connected throughout the world in really good ways. Okay, now we're going to take last thoughts, final thoughts down the line. Senthil, you start. Oh, Laura, where's Laura? Laura's on the exec com. Come. Absolutely.
Well, I just wanted to give a big thanks to all of you to make this a really great and exciting meeting again, AgMIP9. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed many of the talks I could listen to, catching up with you. I think next time we have to have longer breaks, because sometimes we couldn't get you back from the breaks. There are actually things happening where people connect and make plans and try to work or find ways to work together. So thank you to all of you. Thanks to all of you as well for organizing it. I think it was a great meeting again, and hope to see you next time with AgMIP2 at AgMIP 2.0 at the meeting AgMIP 10.
Yeah, we're going to talk about AgMIP 10 just a little right at the end.
Yeah, thank you. I think it was the best AgMIP I've been to. These are not criticisms, these are suggestions. We need more participation from low middle income countries. The network needs to expand in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And I think our new secretary will help Chair do that. Mm-hmm. We need more CG input. We had 3 CG people, Sig and Diego from CIMMIT as well. We need funding to create this network. So we need more effort to create and make functional. And we had colleagues here from the network, Subhash, Naresh, Geeta, Dillis, Lau, Asfaq. We need funding to kind of make this come alive. That's probably the key thing. And finally, we need resources to progress some of these key things for the low input systems, particularly working on models of tropical low input systems, especially the nitrogen carbon routines, orphan crops, extreme events. So lots of things to do. So thanks.
Yeah, great. Laura, please.
Thank you. I've been saying for 3 days that it's my first AgMIP conference, but I've lied to you. It's my second. I've been to the Montpellier one, but at that time I was not an AgMIPer, and I never realized what AgMIP was. I was just there to present a paper. So this is my real first AgMIP conference. I'm here as an executive committee member, to advocate for more policy. I know that it's not easy for modelers to engage with policy, but we can work on models that inform those policy and see which one of us can be the translators and the message bearer for the policymakers. So we will work on that policy group, working group. And in this policy working group, we will obviously have stakeholder engagement, but not only.
Great, wonderful. Thank you. Terrific.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I can second a lot of the points Anthony was making. It was a great meeting. I met a lot of people I've seen with many AgMIP meetings, but I also met several and quite a few new people here, and I was especially pleased seeing so many bright young researchers from very different backgrounds. And I mean, we can still improve on this, but this was a great spirit, and I think that's a big strength we can build upon. But yeah, enough work in front of us, but exciting. Thank you for the team in Colombia, especially for hosting us.
All right, I just wanted to start by thanking all of all of those of you who led sections, paper presentation sessions, working sessions. Some of you got very late notice, but I think overall we had a really nice participation. I know that many of you traveled very long distances and are just now getting over jet lag at the end of 3 exhausting days. I also know many people gave up family holidays for Eid. We really appreciate you being here. Please act on the energy that has built over these 3 days. We've had a lot of great ideas. We've had a lot of proposals for new teams. If we can formalize these new initiatives, we are eager to help on that. We also would appreciate you keeping us in the loop. If an idea germinated at this workshop and flowers down the road, please let us know. We want to be able to document all of those things. We also encourage you to use the AgMIP listserv to make big announcements, opportunities, new projects, help allow everybody to participate. And then I also would encourage us to remember that the reliability of AgMIP is a good motivational factor. So what can we learn from here and deliver at AgMIP10? Let's use that as the next big check-in, and then little steps along the way. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. That reminds me, we're one of the communications activities that we wanted to announce based on coming from the website really is that Natalie Kozlowski, whom you saw all throughout, is going to be doing an AgMIP newsletter now. So we're going to be enhancing our AgMIP communication among ourselves, and then we can think about how to extend it to stakeholders and policymakers. But now the time is for thank yous. So Eric and Natalie, is Pamela around possibly? Could you see if she can come? And Sydney, please. And here's the thank yous. These are the people who got you, all of us here, who made it happen completely in person, completely hybrid, completely virtual, and completely in person. So big hand. Yay! All right. Okay, so now we're going to explain the gifts. They are examples of each of the 6 food groups. And you can look through, and we have, I think, many of them that we have examples of, we have models for. So thank you so much to Eric and Natalie. And will you deliver this to, one is for Sydney, thank you. And then will you get it to Pamela, who is
One last thing.
fantastic. All right, thanks so much, you guys. Right. You guys did it. Fantastic. All right, and final thing is, 2 things on getting back together again. In person, yay! And of course, online too, because now we have full capability. So first, we want to, when I showed the very picture of all those AgMIP meetings, remember there were the global workshops, but there were the regional workshops too. So we want to start and institute regional workshops again. And so our colleagues from India and Geeta, our ExecCom member, has invited us all to Tamil Nadu for a South Asian regional workshop. So we're going to be working on developing that. That's on the regional side, and other regions as well. Anybody who wants to host a workshop, and Min Peng Chen and I were discussing also this afternoon of a potential one in China. So that would be really wonderful. So regional workshops, any ideas? Let's make those happen. Final thing is AgMIP 10. So we're not promising completely where it will be, but what we are exploring with SIG, thanks very much to SIG and colleagues at CIMMIT in Mexico to go there for AgMIP 10. That would be absolutely fantastic. So see you in, is it Obregon? See you in Obregon. Oh, Mexico City. Okay, see you in. All right, which one is closer? We need a field trip, by the way, right? A food trip. Okay, all right, it sounds wonderful. Well, all of the details, of course, to be, and when, but it won't be next year. We're thinking more every 2 years, but so see you in Mexico. Thanks, everybody. This is a great meeting.
And of course, thank you very much to Cynthia for all that she does for AgMIP. Thank you, Cynthia.